He lost $500 million in a single day. But that wasn't the part that kept him awake at night. What haunted him was a moment that lasted less than 10 seconds. In a glass tower high above the city, surrounded by lawyers, cameras, and polished smiles, the country's only indigenous CEO slid a folder across the table and said, very calmly, "If we protect the village, I'm in. If we bury it, I walk." The millionaire had laughed. He had spent months buying politicians, buying studies, buying silence. An indigenous name on the cover of the project was just the last detail. He didn't need a conscience, only a signature. So he pushed that contract back and said, "I'll do it without you." That night, the sky above the village was full of stars. The next morning, his was full of headlines. Investors fleeing, banks retreating, green funds breaking ties, $500 million evaporating as if it had never existed, all because one man who knew the forest better than any boardroom decided to say no. Before I tell you what he discovered too late, write in the comments which country you're watching this story from right now. Você diz, before it was a project, it was just a place on a map. On Victor Duarte's laptop, the valley appeared as a blue curve crossing a patch of green, marked with a thin red line where the dam would go. In the cells of his spreadsheet, it was Hydro V14. In glossy presentations, it became Turi Clean Energy Complex. Only on old paper maps and in the mouths of elders did it still have a real name. Victor didn't bother learning it. He sat by the helicopter window, sunglasses on, watching the river glitter far below. It twisted through forested hills, wide and strong even at the end of the dry season. Smaller streams crawled down the slopes to feed it. Mist clung to the treetops like breath. "Look at that drop," shouted Marcelo, his project manager, over the engine noise. He held up a tablet, the same landscape translated into colored lines and numbers. "Perfect for a reservoir. Natural basin, solid rock. Output projections are insane." He pinched the screen, zooming in on the dam site. On the map, next to the pale blue stain of the future lake, sat a small cluster of brown rectangles near a bend in the water. "And that?" Victor asked. "Indigenous village," Marcelo replied, as if pointing at a rock. "Registry calls it traditional occupation area. 2, maybe 300 people. It's already flagged as subject to relocation in government plans." "Any legal complications?" Victor pressed. "Nothing we haven't handled before," the man in the back seat answered. Helena, communications director, had taken off her headset just enough to be heard. "The state wants this. Investors want clean energy. We just need to make sure no one can accuse us of stepping on them. Then we buy them out, build nice houses somewhere else and call it upgrading their lives," Victor said. Helena hesitated. "It's not enough anymore," she said. "Social media, NGOs, international funds, they'll look deeper. If we flood an indigenous village, someone will ask whose voice said yes. It would help to have a big name from their side." "A chief?" Victor asked. "Feathered headdress, contract in one hand, my arm in the other?" "Cheesy," Helena replied. "I'm talking about someone the market already respects. Someone indigenous who speaks our language. A partner, not a prop." The helicopter dipped toward a cleared patch of ground near a dusty road. Local politicians waited below, shirts sticking to their backs. A banner with "Welcome Progress" painted in fading letters flapping behind them. They called him doctor, shook his hand with both of theirs, smiled too much. None of them mentioned the village by the river. That night, alone in his glass-walled penthouse, Victor opened the preliminary report again. He skipped straight to the numbers he liked: capacity, construction cost, projected return, list of banks and funds with letters of interest. If everything went smoothly, close to 500 million rays would flow into the project over the next year. The valley would turn into megawatts and dividends. His name would again appear in magazines next to words like visionary and bold. At the end of the document, in smaller font, sat the part he always skimmed: social impacts. Presence of one indigenous community in the impact zone. Recommended actions: prior consultation, compensation, relocation program in partnership with state agencies, communication strategy to highlight benefits and minimize resistance. He'd read the same paragraph with different coordinates a dozen times. People became boxes to tick. Anger turned into community noise. Grief became temporary disruption. He closed the report and rubbed his eyes. His phone vibrated on the table. It was Helena. "Found something for the valley," she texted. "Check your email." He opened the link she'd sent. A headline from a financial site took over the screen. From riverbank to boardroom. The country's only indigenous CEO is changing how capital sees the forest. Below the title, a photograph showed a man in his 40s standing in a doorway between two worlds. Behind him, a simple wooden house on stilts, chickens in the dirt, clothes hanging on a line. In front of him, through the open door, the clean lines of a modern office, bookshelves, a laptop, a framed certificate on the wall. The man's skin was the color of wet earth. His black hair tied back showed a few silver threads. He wore dark trousers, an open-neck white shirt, no tie. He held a notebook in one hand. His smile was small, as if he still didn't fully trust the camera. His name was Iago Ara. He had been born in a distant river village, won a scholarship, suffered in dorm rooms where people laughed at his accent, learned to navigate offices where no one looked like him. Years later, he ran a fund dedicated to inclusive infrastructure and community-centered energy. Journalists called him a bridge. Banks called him when they needed to look good. Victor scrolled. "Iago Ara, the country's only indigenous CEO," he read. "Perfect," he called Helena. "That's our missing piece," he said. "If this man's fund signs on, no one can say we're ignoring indigenous voices. We won't just damn the valley, we'll be applauded for doing it together." "That's the idea," she replied. "We approach him as equals, talk about partnership, show him the upside. With his logo next to ours, every ESG fund in Europe will sleep like a baby." "And if he refuses?" Victor asked. "Then no one needs to know he was ever asked," she said. "But I doubt it. People like him fought too hard to sit at that table. They don't walk away from deals this big." Victor looked again at Iago's picture. He didn't see the narrow dirt paths that had led from that wooden house to meeting rooms full of suits. He saw a stamp that could turn controversy into success story. "Set the meeting," he said. 2 weeks later, the 42nd floor conference room of Duarte Capital was ready. Polished wood table, bottles of mineral water in perfect rows, a wall of glass showing the city river below, forced into straight lines between concrete embankments. Victor rehearsed his lines in his head. "I admire your journey. We believe in the same future. Together, we can change the country." The door opened. Iago entered, carrying his own notebook. No entourage, no gold pin, no performative costume. Dark blazer, white shirt, simple shoes. He shook hands with everyone, eyes steady, grip firm. "Thank you for inviting me," he said. "I'm here to listen." "Then let me show you something worth listening to," Victor replied. The lights dimmed. The projector lit up. The valley appeared on the wall again. The river, the planned dam, the calm surface of the future lake covering the bend. Victor talked about energy, growth, jobs, global reputation. He showed letters from banks, preliminary terms from funds already counting on the project. "We're close to securing $500 million in financing," he said at last. "What we want is a partner who understands both capital and community. Someone who can stand with us and say this is the right way forward. Someone like you." The room fell quiet. Iago leaned forward, zoomed the map with his fingertips, and tapped exactly where the brown rectangles of the village hid by the blue. "And this?" he asked. Victor followed his finger and, for the first time that day, hesitated. "That," he said, "is where your story will collide with theirs." For a few long seconds, only the hum of the air conditioner answered the question. Iago kept his fingertip on the cluster of brown rectangles by the river curve, the tiny symbol for the village. On the wall, blown up by the projector, it looked like nothing, a handful of pixels pressed against the blue. "That," Victor said finally, "is a community in the impact zone. We're working with the state to offer relocation, better houses, services. We'll improve their quality of life." He'd said the same line in so many rooms it almost felt true. Iago didn't look away from the map. "Have you been there?" he asked. Victor blinked. "Physically? Not yet. Our field team—" "I wasn't asking about your team," Iago said, voice still calm. "I asked if you have stood there, on that curve, by that river." Victor shifted in his chair. "With respect," Helena cut in smoothly, "our engineers and social consultants have spent months surveying the site. We have photos, interviews, everything. What we need now is a partnership at the financial level." Iago sat back and closed his notebook. "I read your reports," he said. "You talk about them like a detail. Traditional occupation area. Subject to relocation. Limited productive activity." "It's technical language," Victor replied. "Technical language is just a suit you put on a decision," Iago said. "Under it, someone is either allowed to stay or forced to leave." He tapped the map again, softer now. "My people had a saying," he added. "The river writes the names of those who live by it. Your slides don't show any names." Victor laced his fingers together, trying not to let irritation show. "Names aren't the point here," he said. "Impact is. We can manage impact. We're offering them a path out of poverty, electricity, healthcare, school, in exchange for land that, frankly, isn't being used to its full potential." "The land is being used to keep them alive," Iago replied. "That's a kind of potential your spreadsheets don't count." He stood. "I'm not saying no," he said. "I'm saying I don't sign anything until I've been where your model plans to put concrete." Victor frowned. "You want a site visit?" "I want to look those people in the eye before I help flood them," Iago said. "If this project is as clean as you say, you shouldn't be afraid to let me see the dirt." Helena started to protest. Victor lifted a finger. "It's fine," he said, forcing a smile. "We'll organize it, a quick visit. Then we can finalize terms." Iago nodded once. "Then send me the unedited version of your social report," he added, picking up his notebook. "Not just the summary, the annexes, the photos." He left the room without waiting for an escort, walking the corridor like a man used to being looked at and misread. When the door closed, Marcelo exhaled loudly. "He's going to complicate everything," he muttered. "They always do when they start thinking with their origin instead of their position." Victor kept his gaze on the map. "Relax," he said. "We show him a school, a clinic, a few happy faces. He sees the upside, signs, and we move on. He's not going to throw away a $500 million opportunity because of a handful of shacks." Helena didn't answer. For the first time that week, the word opportunity left a sour taste in her mouth. 2 weeks later, the helicopter blades cut the air above the valley again. This time, Iago sat by the window. He did not wear a suit. He wore dark jeans, a plain shirt, a windbreaker. The only thing that looked expensive on him was his watch, and the time it represented. Below, the river shone like a long scar of light. From this height, the village was still just a cluster of shapes near a bend. But as they descended, details rose to meet him. Roofs of palm and tin, canoes pulled up on muddy banks, thin columns of smoke. The helicopter landed in a small clearing. The downdraft sent dust and leaves swirling. Children ran to the edge of the trees, shielding their faces, laughing and shouting in a language the pilot didn't understand. Iago stepped out and smelled home. Not this home. He hadn't been born here. But the mix was the same. Wet earth, wood smoke, river breath. For a moment, the noise of rotors dissolved, replaced by the memory of frogs at night and his grandmother's voice telling stories on a porch. A local official in a polo shirt approached, yelling over the fading engine. "Dr. Iago, welcome, welcome. The community is waiting in the school. We've prepared a brief presentation." "I'd like to see the river first," Iago said. "It will be included in the agenda." "Before the agenda," he insisted. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. This way." They walked a narrow path between houses. Some stood on stilts, others on low foundations, all marked by life. Clothes hanging on lines, tools leaning against walls, kids chasing a skinny dog. Women watched from doorways, eyes sharp. Old men sat on stools, smoking in silence. A teenage girl of maybe 17 leaned against a post, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the visitors. Her hair was braided with colored thread, her t-shirt faded, her bare feet hardened by the path. There was something in her eyes Iago recognized. The cautious calculation of someone who's learned that smiles from outsiders often come with a price. He nodded to her. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look away either. The river waited at the end of the path. It was wide here, slow and deep, carrying sky and leaves on its back. Children splashed in the shallows. An old woman rinsed clothes, hands moving with practiced rhythm. Further down, a boy pulled in a net, the mesh glittering with tiny flashes of silver fish. "This is where the reservoir will begin," Marcelo said, pointing at a spot on his tablet. "Once the dam is up, the water level will rise to—" "How many houses will go under?" Iago asked. Marcelo tapped. "In this immediate area, around 40, he said. "But we'll relocate them higher up. Concrete houses, proper sanitation. It's an upgrade." "And that hill?" Iago asked, pointing to a slope where a cluster of crooked wooden crosses stood beneath a tree. Marcelo frowned at his screen. "That's not in the documents," he said. "It wouldn't be," the teenage girl said behind them. They turned. She'd followed at a distance and now stood with her feet in the damp sand, arms still crossed. "That's our cemetery," she said. "My grandmother is there. The first teacher who came. 2 babies who didn't make it past the first fever. Your paper doesn't talk about them because they don't vote or complain." Iago studied her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Naya," she said. "Did they explain the project to you, Naya?" he asked. "They came with glossy folders," she said. "Said we would have modern houses and access to the city. They showed pictures of kitchens we can't afford to keep stocked. They didn't say the water over my grandmother's bones would be from your dam." Naya," the official interrupted, forcing a smile. "We're still in negotiation. It's not that simple. There are many benefits." "Benefits for whom?" she shot back. "For the man with the helicopter who doesn't know the name of the fish? For the men in this village who already go to town to drink your beer and come back worse than for 'em?" Her anger made her voice shake, but she didn't step back. Iago turned to Marcelo. "Did your social report mention the cemetery?" he asked. Marcelo shifted his weight. "We documented places of cultural importance as indicated by the leaders present in the initial meetings," he said carefully. "If they didn't point it out, it might have been missed. We can adjust." "You can't adjust bones," Naya said. A canoe cut through the water, approaching the bank. A man at the bow raised a hand. He was in his 50s, hair threaded with white, face weathered like river stones. "That's our chief," Naya said, softer. He stepped onto the mud, nodded to Iago, then looked him up and down. "They say you are important," the chief said. "Important men forget where mud feels like." "I remember enough," Iago replied. "Important men also forget where their money comes from." The chief gestured to a log. They sat. Marcelo and the official hovered, uncomfortable. "They want to give us houses on a hill with no river," the chief said. "They say it is safer. Maybe it is. But safe for what? To sit and remember the place we used to live? The project would bring electricity, schools, clinics." Iago began, repeating arguments he'd heard in a dozen rooms. "We have light," the chief interrupted, nodding at the sky. "We have a school, as poor as it is. We have a woman who has cured more fevers than your hospitals will ever see. What we don't have is the power to tell a rich man no and be heard." He looked Iago in the eye. "They tell us that you are one of us," he said. "That your face will be on the paper that decides our future. So I ask, when you sign, will it be with the hand of the boy who once bathed in a river like this? Or with the hand of the man who now eats in rooms so high he can't hear the frogs?" For a moment, the only sound was the river sliding past. Iago felt the weight of the watch on his wrist. He saw the dam on the projector. He saw Naya's eyes. He saw his grandmother's house in another village, long gone now, replaced by a gas station and a flat expanse of concrete. He stood slowly. "Show me your school," he said. "Your well. The place where the water rises when it rains too much. I want to see everything your project calls impact." As they walked back through the village, Naya fell into step beside him. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To decide whether to help build the dam," he said honestly. "And now," she pressed. "Now," he said, glancing at the crosses on the hill one last time, "I'm deciding whether I can live with the man who signs that decision." The answer wouldn't be found in a report. It would be found in what he did when he went back to the 40th floor and sat across from the man who thought he could buy any signature, as long as the price was right. The city always felt louder after the forest. On Monday morning, the 42nd floor meeting room was full again. Same polished table, same cold water bottles, same view of the straightened river below. Only one thing had changed. The map on the wall now had handwritten red circles and notes in the margins. Iago had brought his own pen. Victor walked in 10 minutes late, flanked by Marcelo and Helena. He looked rested, confident, already picturing the headline when this was over. Indigenous CEO joins Turi Valley, Clean Energy Megaproject. He imagined handshake photos, smiling banks, the smooth flow of 500 million into his accounts. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said, sliding into his chair. "Travel chaos, you know how it is." "I know," Iago said. "Sometimes it's hard to get from the top floor back down to the ground." Victor chuckled, choosing to hear that as a joke. "Good," he said, clapping his hands once. "Let's talk partnership. You've seen the site. You've heard the leaders. I trust your concerns are addressed in the latest draft?" He nodded to Marcelo, who pushed a thick folder across the table. Iago didn't touch it. "I didn't come to rubber stamp your draft," he said. "I brought my own." He placed a thinner folder in the center of the table. Helena reached for it, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Victor watched her flip through the first pages. Clauses underlined, entire paragraphs rewritten, new sections inserted. At the top of the first page, where the project's name sat in bold, someone had added 4 words: "Conditional upon community consent." Victor's jaw tightened. "What is this?" he asked. "This," Iago said, "is the only version of your project I can put my name on." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I'm not against energy," he went on. "I'm not against investment. But what you showed me in that valley and what your report called manageable impact are not the same thing. So I made changes." Marcelo turned pages, eyes widening. He read out loud, voice flat. "No homes or sacred areas shall be flooded without explicit written and recorded consent from the community in assemblies held without the presence of company representatives." Another page. Independent monitoring of water quality by a council appointed by the community, with power to halt operations if thresholds are passed. Another. Minimum percentage of profits redirected to a community fund controlled by the village, not the company or the state. Victor's fingers drummed on the table. This is excessive, he said. We have government agencies for that. We have regulators. We can't hand veto power to a village that doesn't even appear on national production charts. They appear by other names, Iago replied. Suicide rates, hospital admissions, alcohol abuse. But those numbers are scattered across different reports, so you don't have to see your share in them. He tapped the folder. My fund will only participate, he said, if these protections are in the contract, signed by you, by me, and by their chief. If the project works with them, not over them. Victor let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You realize what you're asking? He said. You want me to go back to banks and say we're giving an indigenous village the power to stop a $500 million investment? I want you to tell banks the truth, Iago said. That if this project cannot exist without drowning a cemetery and ripping people from a river they've lived with for generations, then maybe it shouldn't exist at all. Helena looked from one man to the other. Maybe we can find a middle ground, she tried. Phase protections. Start small. Then, there is no middle ground on whether the dead are flooded, Iago said quietly. The room fell silent. Outside, cars moved like veins of light through the city. Inside, the air felt thick. Victor pushed the folder back toward him with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. I didn't invite you here to renegotiate the world, he said, voice colder now. I invited you because I thought you understood how big deals work. I do, Iago said. I just refuse to pretend the cost is invisible. Victor's temper slipped its leash. Listen, he snapped. You of all people should know what an opportunity this is. You fought to get out of a place like that. You think they wouldn't want their kids growing up in concrete houses instead of wooden shacks? You think they're happier with frogs and mud than with jobs and Wi-Fi? I think you've never asked them without a camera on, Iago replied. And you didn't see their eyes when they talked about that river. I did. He stood, slowly, deliberately. My fund will not invest, he said. Not without those conditions. Not with this design. If you change the project, we can talk again. If not, this is where our paths separate. Victor also rose, both hands on the table. You're walking away from $500 million, he said. Do you understand that? No, Iago said. I'm walking away from being the indigenous man you point at when people ask who you hurt. He picked up his notebook. You still have your banks, he added. Your politicians. You don't need me. You said it yourself in your emails. Victor stiffened. What emails? He asked. Helena swallowed. Iago, she began, but he was already at the door. In the attachments your assistant sent by mistake, he said over his shoulder. The ones where your team calls the village noise to be neutralized and jokes about putting the cemetery under a beautiful artificial lake. He paused. You can build whatever your conscience and the law allow, he said. Just not with my name on the front page. The door clicked shut behind him. No one spoke for a full minute. Marcelo finally broke the silence. He's bluffing, he said. He'll come back when he sees the returns. Victor stared at the empty folder like it had personally insulted him. We don't need him, he said, jaw tight. We have letters of interest. We have the state. We'll move forward. If he wants to stay small and righteous in his boutique fund, let him. Helena didn't argue, but when she looked at the email icon on her screen, a knot formed in her stomach. News travels faster than water. Within days, rumors were already leaking. Anonymous sources mentioned a disagreement between Duarte Capital and the country's only indigenous CEO over a controversial hydro project. Environmental groups dug into public records. Satellite images of the valley appeared in tweets and threads. Someone from the village uploaded a shaky video of Naya pointing at the Hill of Crosses. "It's not unoccupied land," she said in the video, voice trembling but clear. "It's where our dead sleep." The clip didn't explode. It simmered, shared in circles that already cared about such things. What detonated everything came a week later. Iago was on stage at an international sustainability conference in front of a green-lit backdrop with the logo of 3 major banks. The moderator asked a gentle question about the challenges of reconciling growth and tradition. He could have stayed vague, talked in safe phrases about dialogue and balance. Instead, he thought of Naya, of the chief, of the river filling skies no one in that hotel ballroom had ever seen. "Last month," he said slowly, choosing each word, "my fund was invited to join a major project in a river valley that sustains an indigenous community. The numbers were excellent. The returns would have made my investors very happy." A murmur rippled through the audience. "What made me say no," he continued, "was reading a line in a private email from the project's lead investor. He wrote, and I quote, 'The native village is just noise. Once the dam is up, they'll move or disappear. Either way, the river will finally be profitable.'" Cameras flashed. The moderator blinked, caught between horror and excitement. "I won't name the project here," Iago added. "Most of you already received the prospectus." He glanced at the front row, where representatives from various funds shifted in their seats. "But I will say this. If your due diligence does not include asking who pays the price on the ground, then your green label is just paint." The quote spread like spilled ink. Within hours, financial news sites were calling, hungry for confirmation. Activists posted screenshots of land registries and leaked maps. Hashtags mixed the valley's old name with words like "not noise" and "our river has names." By evening, Duarte Capital released a statement calling Iago's comments misleading and taken out of context. By morning, 3 of the largest foreign funds on Victor's prospect list had quietly withdrawn their letters of intent. Given reputational risks and unclear social governance, one internal memo read, "We recommend suspending participation." A domestic bank paused negotiations on a big credit line, citing the need for further assessment of social impact and compliance. The stock of a construction company linked to the project dropped 8% in 2 days. Victor's phone didn't stop vibrating. What happened? Are the indigenous groups suing? Is there any truth to these emails circulating? Why was I reading about this in the news instead of in your risk report? In a tense board meeting, someone finally said it out loud. "You lost $500 million in potential commitments because you couldn't accept a few community protections and a partner who actually knew what he was doing." Victor didn't answer. On a screen at the end of the table, a news site showed a photo of Naya standing by the river, subtitles translating her words. "He called us noise. The river heard. So did someone with a bigger microphone." Weeks later, back in the valley, the dam site remained a patch of forest and rock. No trucks, no fences, no concrete. The official from the first visit returned with a smaller delegation, carrying no glossy folders this time. "The project is under review," he told the chief, sweating under the shade of the tree. Investors pulled back. For now, nothing moves. Naya watched from the riverbank as Iago stepped off a boat. He approached quietly, nodding to elders, shaking hands, sitting on the same log as before. "You stopped him?" she asked. "I slowed him down," he said. "Money is like a river too. It always looks for new paths. But at least this time, it didn't run over you." She studied him. "You lost money?" she asked. "I lost deals," he corrected. "The ones who really lost were the ones who believed they could profit from your disappearance. They thought saying no to me was smart. It cost them $500 million. Naya let that number hang in the air like distant thunder. "And you?" she asked. "What did it cost you?" He looked at the river. "A quieter sleep," he said, "and a seat at some tables I no longer want." The chief joined them, lowering himself slowly onto the log. "They say you are important in the city," the old man said, "that your word can move numbers none of us here will ever see. Is that true?" "Sometimes," Iago answered. "Good," the chief replied. "Then remember this. Every time your word moves numbers, it is moving something else you can't see on a screen. Water, roots, stories." He placed a weathered hand over Iago's. "And if someday outra vez they ask you to sign something that buries people like us," he added, "I hope you remember how it felt to make a rich man lose money instead." Iago nodded. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over another part of the horizon. Somewhere, another valley's fate was being reduced to lines in a spreadsheet. But here, for now, the river still wrote the names of those who lived by it. And a man in a high office had learned, too late for his balance sheet, but not for his conscience, that refusing to share power with the only indigenous CEO in the country had cost him more than a business deal. It had cost him the illusion that some people can be erased quietly, without the water ever learning how to say their names.